Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, with a look at the second generation Moto E. Now there are two versions of this phone. There's the 4G LTE version like the one I have here, and then the 3G version. The 3G version retails for $119, the 4G retails for $149. That's off contract, so that's quite a bargain for a 4.5-inch smartphone running the latest version of Android. Now while both phones have a 1.2 GHz quad-core processor, the 3G version has a Snapdragon 200 processor with an Adreno 302 GPU, while the LTE version has a Snapdragon 410 processor with an Adreno 306 GPU. But beyond that, they're basically the same devices. So we have 1 gig of RAM, we have 8 gigs of internal storage with a micro SD card slot that does support 32 gigs. In terms of that display, this is 4.5 inches with a resolution of 540 by 960. That's good for 245 pixels per inch, and this is an LCD IPS panel covered in Corning Gorilla Glass 3. The battery is 2,390 milliamp hours. There is a water-resistant coating on this phone like the Moto E from last year. So that means you can splash it with water. You don't necessarily want to submerge it because it does not have an IP certification rating. In terms of cameras, we have a 5 megapixel camera, this time with autofocusing and 720p HD video, along with other features like slow motion video. Now they have finally added a front camera this time. The last Moto E did not have one, but unfortunately it's only VGA. Alright, so let's go and crack into our box here. Pretty simple packaging. They don't even put tape on it. So inside is our Moto E. As you can see, I have the white version. This is also available in black if you prefer, but you can change it up with some of the accessories they offer, such as the Motorola bands and the Motorola grip shell, which I'll explore later in this video. Alright, so the display on the device is pretty clear here, 4.5 inches. It's a little lopsided here, and that's because part of the display is taken up by the Android keys. We're going to set that aside for just a moment while we take a look at our contents here, which are pretty basic. So we have a pretty standard USB wall adapter with the cable permanently attached here. Now in terms of paperwork, we have our quick start guide. Of course, I'll go through some of that in this video. And then we have our safety, warranty, and product information pamphlet. All right, the first order of business is to boot up our phone. I'm just going to tap and hold the power button on the right side. Alright, so we're all booted up and ready to go. So before we take a close look at the software, let's take a look at the hardware. So we have a 4.5-inch LCD IPS panel, 540 by 960, good for 245 pixels per inch. And this is an IPS display, so if you look off axis, you can see it does a pretty decent job, although it's not one of the better displays out there, but it's a pretty sharp and bright display. Up top, you'll find your earpiece/loudspeaker. So these used to be separated on the last generation Moto E in 2014. The loudspeaker used to be at the bottom, but instead we have more space for the screen. In the upper right, we have our VGA front-facing camera, we have our ambient light sensor and proximity sensor. Now what we're missing here this time is an LED notification light, and that's because the display is an active display, which will show you your pending notifications right on the display like you would on the Moto X. Now on the back, you'll find our microphone right next to our 5 megapixel camera with autofocusing and 720p video recording. A pretty unremarkable camera here, no optical image stabilization, no LED flash. We also have our Motorola dimple toward the center, which picks up on the Motorola design we're all familiar with. Like all Motorola phones, we have our headphone jack center mounted toward the top. Along the right side, we'll find our textured power button along with our volume rocker right below it. Down below, we'll find the micro USB 2.0 charging port. This does not feature turbocharging like the Moto X. We also have a microphone right above that. Now, popping off this band is really easy, comes right off, and that gives you access to the micro SD card slot along the side and the micro SIM here. This does not have an LSM like other Motorola phones. Now if you flip the phone over on the right side, you'll see we have our buttons here. So when you pop off this band, it does include the buttons. So when you buy the bands, they actually include the buttons built right in, and those interface with these little contact points here. Now what's really interesting to me is that they've kind of hidden the IMEI information in this little slot here. So you can use a pair of tweezers to pull this out to bring out the IMEI sticker, which is kind of a clever way of hiding it. So let's go and take a look at our user interface. So once again, this is pretty much close to stock Android, in this case Android 5.0. So it has all the design characteristics of Android 5.0 with these expandable notifications, with our clear all function toward the bottom. You can expand them with your 2 fingers, and then you can swipe down to get to quick settings, pretty much the stock Android experience and interface here. You can quickly toggle on Wi-Fi, turn it off, auto rotate, mute, and that sort of thing. And then we can swipe up here to unlock it. Now the home screen, if you swipe to the right, takes you right to Google Now. Of course, you can swipe up to get to Google Now, and you can command it with your voice. Okay, Google, what's the weather like tomorrow in Rochester Hills?
Tomorrow's forecast for Rochester Rochester Hills is 24 degrees and partly cloudy.
Now, unlike Moto X or the Droid Turbo or other higher-end Motorola phones, this phone is not listening to your voice command when the phone is locked. Although you can expand the reach of Google through some settings here. So let me go ahead and get to our Google settings here. I'm just going to go to Google now. We're going to go to Settings, and then we're going to go to Voice. And under Voice, what we're going to do is enable OK Google detection from any screen. Oh, excuse me there. So you want to enable it from any screen. This is off by default. So basically what will happen is if the phone is lit, you can say, OK Google, launch YouTube. Now this works no matter what you're doing. So even if you're in the Google app, you can say, OK Google, show me pictures of a Yorkshire Terrier.
Pictures of a Yorkshire Terrier, sure.
You can also tap and hold on the home screen to get to your home screen editor so you can adjust your wallpapers, add widgets if you want. You can also manage your settings for the home screen, which includes a lot of Google Now settings. So you can change your search language, your voice interaction, phone search, as well as your Google Now card. So if you want to manage those, you can as well. We also have our recent apps with that stacked card viewer, which is very quick and smooth. So of course you can swipe to dismiss things or bring them forward like so. And then you can also search while you're in this view here just by tapping the icon. Now we have some nice do not disturb settings available when we hit the volume button. Of course, we have our volume slider, and right now we're receiving all of our notifications. If you go to priority, you can select what notifications you want to receive in this mode. So for example, if you just want to receive your events and reminders, receive your calls or receive your messages, receive calls from only a certain number of people or from people who call twice, that sort of thing, all of that is manageable here. Of course, you can just be simple here and just select none so you receive no notifications, and you can limit this by time from 15 minutes all the way up to 8 hours. Taking a look at the app selection, of course, we have the standard array of Google apps plus a few Motorola apps thrown in, including a Motorola Gallery. We have an FM radio to work with the FM tuner. We have Motorola Alert, Moto, Migrate, and we have a Help app right there. Now, Motorola Alert has a few functions here. Its primary function is to send your GPS location to an emergency contact. But you can also use Follow Me so that they can follow your GPS location, or Meet Me to send your current GPS location so they can find you. So if you want to set up emergency mode, what you'll have to do is select a specific text message, which you can modify here. You can also set this to contact local emergency services, and when you tap this, you can designate those services, or you can just alert a specific emergency contact, as I have here. Now, once you set up this emergency mode, you'll get this little countdown timer. Once it's done, it will sound the alarm and notify your contacts. We have a few other features here, including Moto, which includes things like Moto Assist. Basically, these are automated actions depending on your current conditions, such as time of day, GPS location, and that sort of thing. So you can kick in sleeping mode, which will mute your notifications during specific times of day, which you can manage here, or you can activate meeting mode, which activates depending on your calendar settings. You can also set up an auto reply to text messages that may come in while you're in your meeting. We also have our actions, and one of them is twist for quick capture. So basically, in order to use that feature, all you have to do is twist the phone really quickly to launch into the camera, and then you can twist again to launch the front-facing camera. We also have Moto Display here, which we're familiar with from the Moto X. Basically, the lock screen acts as your notification center. So when you receive a new notification, it will flash on the lock screen. Or if you pick up the phone from a flat surface, or if you take it out of your pocket, it'll pop up and show your notification. Now you have several options here, so you can turn that feature off entirely. You can hide some of the notification details from the lock screen so people can't look at them. Or you can have it vibrate on touch, so if you have a pending notification, it'll vibrate the phone for you when you pick it up. We also have Motorola Migrate, which allows you to transfer from one phone to this phone or from this phone to another phone, so you have both options here. But if you're transferring from, for example, an Android phone, you get to transfer your photos, videos, messages, and more. If you're transferring from an iPhone, you can transfer your contacts or anything on your SIM, as well as your calendar. And then from an older type of phone, you can transfer your contacts. Now, if you take a look at the settings panel, again, it's pretty close to stock. They've added a few things here. So, of course, we still have search, so we can search our settings panel, which is very useful. You can also see that under device, we have Moto, which is pretty much the app that I showed you earlier. Basically brings you to the same functionality. Now in terms of storage, not a whole lot of space is left to the user. 5 gigs is available out of 8 gigs, and right now I have less than 3 gigs available, and that's with very few photos and videos taken, very few apps downloaded, so you're going to run into some space limitations pretty quickly with this phone. But of course, you do have a micro SD card slot, but of course, not all apps fully support loading on the micro SD card. We also have our battery information, so you can see our battery timeline. Again, pretty close to stock Android. We do have multi-user mode here, so you can add additional users to use this phone if you prefer. photographer as well as a guest mode. We do have screen pinning here, which is pretty easy to activate. You just go to security, go to screen pinning, turn it on, and then in order to activate it, you have to go to this overview mode, and the first app in the overview mode is eligible for pinning. So if you want a different app, what you'll have to do is bring that app forward, then go to overview, then you can pin it. Once it's pinned, the user cannot exit this screen without pressing these two buttons at the bottom. We also have our Motorola privacy settings, so if you want to restrict how much information Motorola is collecting from your device, you can do so here. You also have your Motorola ID. In my case, I just use my Google account. All right, so let's quickly take a look at that camera app. So it's a pretty basic interface that we're familiar with from other Motorola devices. So if you want to access your settings, you just swipe in from the left edge, and you get to things like HDR, which is set to auto, so it'll automatically determine whether the scene can benefit from HDR. Now, you have to turn on manual focus because that's off by default. If you don't turn it on, what will happen is that when you touch the screen, it takes the photograph. This gives you an opportunity to move the focus point around on the scene before taking the photograph. We also have our video settings. We have HD 720p and slow-mo in 720p, so not a lot of settings there. We have panorama mode, we have our timer, we have our geolocation, which you can turn on. We can change our storage location to the micro SD card slot. We can change our resolution from widescreen 3.7 megapixels to the standard 4x3 at 5 megapixels. You can also turn off the shutter release sound, and you can turn on or turn off quick capture. So with this very simple interface, you just tap on the screen to take the photograph. You swipe up to zoom in and out. You can start recording video with this icon in the upper right corner. You can pause recording or stop the recording. And again, you swipe up like this to zoom in and out. And you can tap anywhere on the screen to take a photograph while recording video. Now, in terms of image quality, it's actually pretty decent for a 5 megapixel camera on a $120 phone. You have to keep in mind that we don't have a high-end internal processor here for image processing. We don't have the best optics or the best sensor. So it delivers pretty reliable results, especially in bright sunlight conditions. So you get sharp, clear images. It does a pretty good job finding focus accurately under most conditions, but there are a few faults here. One of them is color reproduction. It tends to be very orange. It washes out green colors while bringing forward blues and reds and warmer colors, so it tends to really distort the color spectrum on your photos. The other problem is exposure compensation. For the most part, it does a fairly decent job, but has a tendency to underexpose, so darks or shadows in an image can be a little too dark to show the detail that you need. Now, in terms of video, again, we have a 720p camera here with no optical or software stabilization, so the results are pretty shaky, especially if you're using this handhelded. But if you have even lighting conditions or bright lighting conditions and a steady hand, you can get pretty decent results here. But just like the still camera, the video camera also suffers from underexposure and an orangey tone. Now, the great thing here is that we do have continuous autofocusing, although it can be slow to respond, but it's pretty nice to have that on a low-budget phone. Alrighty guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, testing out the front-facing VGA camera of the Moto E, and this is basically better than nothing because that's all you had last year was no front-facing camera. Now, it's not a bad camera as far as VGA cameras go. It does a pretty good job exposing, so you can at least see yourself on the camera, but that's about all you can say about the camera, but of course, it's something. Not to say this is an excellent display. Huge improvement over the Moto E from last year with almost no light leaking along the sides. It's bright, vivid, clear with deep contrast, looks great off axis, and works great outdoors. Now text also looks really pin sharp here. It's not as sharp as certainly higher end phones are. Of course, if you look at really small text, you will see the pixels. Battery life is pretty good here. They do advertise 24 hours of battery life, and that's exactly what I got here. Last time I had a full charge was 3 p.m. yesterday. It's 3 p.m. today, and I'm doing pretty good. I have about 10 hours left according to the estimate here, and that's with a little under 4 hours of on-screen time, and that's maximum brightness. Now, although we do not have the stereo speakers of the Moto G or the Moto X, this mono speaker is loud and clear and faces in the proper direction. The only thing I have to warn you about is that, of course, this is also your earpiece, and there has been one occasion where I was on a speakerphone and I went to place the phone to my ear to talk to the person, and it just blasted my eardrum, so keep that in mind. That's the only drawback with this type of design.
The 2015 Ford F-150, with its high-strength military-grade aluminum alloy body, is championing breakthrough technologies and innovations that will impact U.S. automotive manufacturing for years to come. Meet the future of tough.
Now, in terms of our Geekbench 3 scores, you can see the Moto E actually bests the Moto G, and that's because the LTE version has a slightly better processor than the Moto G. Otherwise, the specs are fairly similar. Of course, the Moto X and the Nexus 6 are certainly much higher powered devices. Now, quickly, I want to take a look at the Motorola Grip Shell, which is one of the accessories sold alongside the Moto E on the Motorola website. This retails for $19.99 and is available in multiple colors. Now, first, you want to remove the band surrounding the phone, and then you have to slide it in top first, and it kind of clicks into place, and then you have to work the edges around the side of the phone, and it can be a little tricky here, so you basically want to peel it back here so it wraps the phone. So taking a look at the case, it does provide some lay-on-table protection for the front glass. If you look toward the bottom, you see we have a micro USB 2.0 cable with plenty of room, and a cutoff for the microphone along with another one for the microphone near the camera. The camera is nicely surrounded, so it provides some additional protection. They even preserve the Motorola dimple, and you have lots of grip along the side here. So you have lots of impact protection and grip for your phone. Toward the top, you have a cutoff for your headphone jack. It is a little cramped here, so you may have some trouble with certain headphones. Now on the right side, we have these rubberized buttons for volume and power on and off, which feel a little mushier than I'd like to see, but they do work well enough. Now, although it does bulk up the phone, it does provide a nice integrated protection solution for your phone, as well as personalization options to give you some additional color choices. Next up, we have our Motorola bands, and these come in 3 packs and they retail for $19.99 each. You have 2 choices here, so you have red, blue, and yellow, or purple, pink, and turquoise. Now, essentially, these are identical to the bands that come on the phone. They even replace the buttons along the side. Same design, just a different color. So if you ever damage your Moto band or anything like that, all you have to do is swap them out to spruce up your phone. Now, I think it's pretty natural to compare the Moto G to the Moto E just because both devices are fairly similar in pricing. So what's the difference here? Well, obviously the big difference with the Moto G is that it's 5 inches versus 4.5 inches. It's also a much higher resolution display. This is a 720p display, good for 298 pixels per inch versus the 540p display on the Moto E, which is good for 256 ppi. So a sharper display on the Moto G, even though it is noticeably dimmer. The Moto G also has front-facing stereo speakers, which are excellent. We have a front-facing mono speaker on the Moto E. We also have better cameras here on the Moto G with 8 megapixels versus 5. Now, the real dilemma between these phones is 3G versus LTE. Now, if you're looking at the 3G versions of each phone, there's a pretty big price gap here, $179 versus $119. But when you're talking about the Moto E LTE model, you have to wonder if $149 versus $179 is worth a $20 saving in order to get LTE. So personally, I think I'd prefer the Moto G for its better display, audio, and camera. But in the end, the Moto E is a standout phone for its price, delivers great performance thanks to its stock Android experience, which is right up to date, so it feels really modern. Doesn't feel like a cheap budget phone running laggy software, feels great to use. It also has a bright and clear display and fairly decent cameras. It gets the job done, but they're definitely not the best out there. But of course, that's to be expected with such a low-end phone. So what do you guys think? Do you think the Moto E is a good value over the Moto G? Please let me know in the comment section below. So that's going to do for me in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.